Hey, what's going on, guys, and happy Friday once again. Today's story takes us over to Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. This goes back to another FYE trip that I had. Again, this was with my brother. We went down to FYE to pick up another Friday the 13th DVD. Mind you, this was during the heyday of the deluxe edition DVDs. But this was the only time that this ever happened when getting these movies on DVD. We went down to go pick one up, and sure enough, they had two copies of Friday the 13th, Part 5 on DVD. They had the deluxe edition DVD, and then they had this what appeared to be an older version. Now, this one was marked as used, and it was available for $3 or $4.99. It was very cheap. Being that I was just a kid right out of high school getting some of these films, money was very tight, obviously, so I decided to get the one that was a lot cheaper. I would take this one home and peruse the back a little bit. From what I recall, I don't remember having the idea that I was going to see anything other than a Friday the 13th Jason movie. At this point, my brother still had a lot of interest in the series, so he was watching these with me, and I remember we had just seen Part 3. Unfortunately, I would see these out of order, so seeing this movie, I was going to learn before seeing the actual film of Part 4 that Jason was supposed to die. And I naively went into Part 5 thinking, okay, a new beginning, he's just going to resurrect somehow. So we get home and decide to throw on Friday the 13th Part 5. The opening shows Corey Feldman in this rainy scene with this casket, and the body of Jason Voorhees is dug up. It's actually a really great scene even to this very day watching it. You see this slasher down in this pit with worms coming out of his eyes, hockey mask on and everything. Part of me wants to question why they didn't take his garbs off, but what do you expect? But the presence of this Jason rising out of the grave, I remember thinking to myself at the time, now this is the scariest version of Jason I've ever seen. There was this really menacing evil force to this Jason, and I remember saying to myself in the moment, Jesus, now this is the scariest the character has ever looked. I can't wait to watch this film. Now you can imagine my surprise as I started watching the movie after this opening scene. But nevertheless, I was super excited to take the dive into Friday the 13th Part 5. But I started noticing something right away that was different from any of the other entries I had seen before. I noticed I was really laughing a lot at this movie. Now mind you, when you're watching a horror film with somebody, it's a lot easier to laugh out loud. You don't feel so weird if you're by yourself. So naturally, being with my brother, we were having a great time watching this, and we just said, like, this one's really funny. When you would see scenes of this kid getting hacked to pieces because he offered this guy a candy bar, I remember thinking to myself, this is so over the top and dark, but why am I so entertained by this? I was almost dumbfounded at the time because, mind you, I had just really dove into horror at this point, so I hadn't seen a whole lot of movies like Friday the 13th Part 5. Sure enough, these paramedics pull up to the scene. It went right over my head that one of the paramedics was reacting a little weird. But then again, how could you notice when the other one is chewing bubble gum and not even wearing gloves or anything, looking at this poor body that's been decapitated? The juxtaposition of these two paramedics is honestly hysterical. So any thought of maybe something was going on with this silent paramedic completely went over my head. Character of Tommy Jarvis in this one, looking back now, I don't know how to feel about it. Does it work for this movie? I think it does work because honestly, I've never seen a movie like Friday the 13th Part 5 really ever since. This movie has a certain shade of gray that if you were to ask me, what is a slasher film like Friday the 13th Part 5? I don't know that you can really give a great answer. Good answer, sure. But I don't think that there's a movie that you could say, oh yeah, this movie's just like Friday the 13th Part 5. It makes it all the more interesting when you learn that the guy who directed Part 5 had some experience in directing softcore porn movies, so go figure. But this was the most interesting thing about Friday the 13th Part 5 I'll never forget. So like I said, me and my brother were enjoying watching these films, but this is the first time I ever noticed my brother really focusing on one of these films. Granted, it's not like he wasn't watching the other ones, but I could tell that Part 5 had some sort of a grip on my brother like I'd never seen before or since when he'd watch a Friday movie. He was really into the humor and that really off-the-cuff sleaze factor that this movie had. Granted, I was right there with him. I was just like, man, this is so fun. And that's the word I'll always use to describe Part 5 as fun. One of the things I do enjoy about Part 5 is the characters in this film. Reggie the Reckless is one of my favorite kid actors in a horror film. As much as I love Danielle Harris and others, there's something about Reggie that is so lovable. A lot of times kids could be somewhat annoying in horror movies, but Reggie is just so damn lovable. There's also something really funny thinking about a halfway house in the middle of the woods, a camping area where they give these people that have clear anger issues axes. Just the thought of that is completely laughable. And then when you see these kids running off and banging each other, and then these crazy redneck neighbors pull up, cussing them out, threatening to blow the place up because they have a bomb on them, There's insanity from scene to scene that every time you watch part 5, it never disappoints to just completely entertain you and make you laugh. But the dark undertone of this film is something that I think actually complements the over-the-top, really dark humor that this movie has. Whenever you feel the presence of Jason, albeit through the mind of Tommy Jarvis or the acts of this Jason character ensuing evil, it's really intense. Some of the moments in the film that really creep me out is when Tommy has these weird premonitions of seeing Jason in the room, and when you see this Jason show up, it's one of the scariest looks of the character. He's covered in blood from the axe of part 4, but that weird, almost statuesque look, because this Jason isn't moving, considering he's somewhat of a ghost in Tommy's mind, will always creep me out. Whenever you see that Jason holding the axe in that bedroom where he sees him in the mirror, that was a shot in the movie that I saw. It really got under my skin. That's a look of Jason that I will always be a big fan of. One of the scenes that I'll never forget sticking with me the first time watching the film is the kid who stutters just trying to hit on one of the girls in the halfway house to try to make love to. But I'll never forget seeing that for the first time. It was equally parts funny, and I also felt extremely horrible for this kid, which I think is, in a way, the twisted sense of humor that the director Danny Steinman had in this. And after getting denied, walks upstairs, tries to cry it off or talk to Violet about it, and that doesn't work either, so when he turns around, he gets this axe right in the face. And it's such a cruel way to go. This poor kid could not catch a break. Another thing about part 5 that I'll never forget is seeing Debbie Sue Voorhees. In my opinion, this is the hottest woman in all the Friday the 13th movies. What's interesting is these two seem perfectly normal. They're just hound dogs with each other. They don't really show any signs of any sort of mental problems, be it schizophrenia or any sort of PTSD or something like at least Tommy shows he has issues with. And characters like Violet, they clearly show that she has some sort of issue talking to people and being in the moment and being present with people, which I can kind of relate to be honest with you. But these two, they're just hound dogs. They want to have sex all the time. And in this scene, we see this guy being a real peeping Tom, watching this love scene happen, and then boom, he gets killed. I feel like you could really put some sort of weird backstory with this character, but the fact that there is none, and he's just this creep that's watching him and gets killed, I don't know, there's something hysterical about that, as dark as it is as well. There's this really weird dichotomy of really dark subject matter when you start to think about the scenes, and then just the hysterical nature of these people getting dropped one by one, seemingly by Jason, but I would soon to find out that I'd be in for a rude awakening on that. Another scene that I'll never forget as long as I can live is the demon scene, specifically when he says, "Damn those enchiladas," and runs right to that outhouse in the middle of the woods. I don't know what Demon's job was. Was he some kind of roadie for a band? Was he just a guy living his life, driving around, making money any way he could with his girlfriend? There's all these backstories I try to give some of these characters to try to make sense of it, but in the end, it's just funny to see the scenes play out. Talk about a vulnerable way to die. Taking a crap and getting speared right through the stomach. I mean, what are you going to do dying in an outhouse? I could think of a million better ways to die than dying in an outhouse. As I'm describing this movie to you guys, I feel like I'm sounding like there's a bunch of problems with part 5, but on the contrary, when I think about part 5, that's the one I will go to in a moment's notice when wanting to watch a Friday the 13th movie, which is all the more interesting the first time watching this film when I realized, holy crap, this wasn't Jason. This was the paramedic that we saw in the beginning of the movie. And I'll never forget my brother's reaction to this. We're sitting there watching the film, and my brother had another Old English 40 if memory serves, and he might have been eating some M&Ms. But I'll never forget, we see that final battle scene go down with Pam and Reggie, and all of a sudden, boom, this Jason character hits the spikes. And mind you, the fact that Jason was wearing blue didn't make any difference to me. I just thought, well, it's a different movie, and I was just like, he's wearing blue. That's fine by me. I don't care. And then when you see the face, I was totally confused by the idea of this guy wearing what's known in the mask collecting world as a hood. This is basically a mask that you can buy that has a face cut out that you would wear, and you could put a hockey mask over it to display it, and it looks like you've got a Jason bust. But here this guy is with this hood on, and the flaps kind of bent open around his face. And I'll never forget, my brother just looks at me and goes, oh, I guess that wasn't Jason. And he was totally unfazed by it. And it made me laugh so hard, because my initial reaction was, what the hell? That wasn't Jason in this movie? It was a paramedic? And in that moment, when my brother told me that, it made me realize immediately I can't be upset about this. I just had one of the most fun times watching a Friday the 13th film for the first time. And the fact that it wasn't Jason, I am not going to let that bother me. Now, I don't know if anybody in real time in the movie theater who saw this felt that way, but I instantly just dropped that weird anger I had for a split second and just started laughing with my brother. Especially after the fact when we see that there was a mugshot of Jason from the newspaper the paramedic father had. If the kid that died is the paramedic's father, why didn't he say anything? Did anybody not know that that was his kid? Did he hide that? There are a million plot holes in Friday the 13th Part 5 that don't make sense, but this is one of those instances where it clearly does not matter. And I'm not talking about just to me. I'm talking about look at the fan base. I've been going to horror conventions for almost 10 years now, or this will be my 10th year going to horror conventions. I see more people wearing Friday the 13th Part 5 shirts. I hear more people quote Friday the 13th Part 5 more than any other Friday the 13th movie. And it is just simply incredible to me how this was during a time in movies where even though this was coming up from Paramount Pictures, it acted in such a way that was so rebellious to say, screw it, let's just do another one. We killed them, but they made so much money. Let's just make it an impostor. Could you imagine something like that happening today? It wouldn't. It couldn't. There's too many big people sitting around round tables discussing, how can we make this next one? We got to do this. Here's the rules for this, this, and this. The crazy risk to do something like that is so renegade. So when I talk to the average person that's a big Friday the 13th fan, I always hear that this one is very high up in the list. And this is one of those occasions where plot holes, things that don't exactly make sense, all this being over a candy bar, it doesn't matter to the fans. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter to me either. This movie is purely and simply entertaining. And if that's good enough for everybody else, that's clearly good enough for me. Friday the 13th Part 5 is one of the most rewatchable, the most quotable, the most fun entries, I think, in the entire series. And it had creeped up on my list every single time I do a ranking. I think right now it sits at number 3 or 4. When you talk about Friday the 13th Part 5, the only way to talk about it is to almost somewhat make fun of the film itself because of all of its unsolved mysteries and plot holes and weird devices that happen in here. But everybody says it with a smile on their face. This is one of those weird occasions where, despite the fact that the film is not constructed like the way maybe Part 4 is, or Part 3 or Part 2, it's one of those movies that has that X factor, and you just have a hell of a good time watching it. It also birthed my love for the band Pseudo Echo, who had a song No Life in His Eyes in here, and I went on to discover all kinds of great songs that that band has done. They have some incredible sounding tracks that sound a lot like that song, that if you're a fan of that song, check those guys out. They're a great band. So anytime somebody talks to me about Friday the 13th Part 5, I can't help but have a smile come to my face. Do you feel like this was one of those entries that creeps up on your list over time? Did you love it from the start? Do you care that it's not Jason? Do you care that it has a lot of plot issues? Or do you just say, you know what, this movie is so fun and entertaining, that stuff doesn't matter to me? But when a movie has that weird X factor that you can't really explain that just makes it so damn entertaining, I can forgive almost anything in a movie. I have great memories of Friday the 13th Part 5, and it's one of those movies that you can throw on in a moment's notice. Because of the black sheep identity that it has, you don't feel like you have to follow it up with anything else. And it's also a breath of fresh air when you binge the movies, I feel, because after you get to Part 4, going to Part 5 is such a stark contrast from anything you've seen before, and definitely from anything you'll see after that. Thank you guys for watching this, and tell me your story of seeing Friday the 13th Part 5 for the first time. Huge, giant thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you guys, this would not be possible. To get behind the scenes photos, videos, music, private live streams, and much more, you can subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Thank you to my patrons.